This is another very strange case. It's not very long, but it is quite complicated. So we're going to get straight into it. But before we do, let's talk about disclaimers. It's a true story. It's a true crime. It's got real people. So please, if you're commenting, just bear that in mind and be a bit sensitive. On the 12th of January 1981, dogs found the remains of 2 dead bodies. The bodies were buried together side by side in unmarked graves, hidden in woods about 100 yards away from Wallaceville Road in Harris County, Houston, Texas. The bodies had already started to decompose, and it's expected that they'd been dead for up to 2 months. Investigators managed to determine there was a female. She was 15 to 25 years old. She was white with possible Native American admixture. She was between 5'4" and 5'9". She had long reddish brown hair styled in a ponytail. Her body was discovered near a pair of green running shorts. There was also a bloody towel covering her, and there were no other clothing on the scene. It said that she likely had a gap in her teeth, and she was likely a nail biter because her nails were quite short and stubby. There was also a young male. He could have been as young as 15, but it was approximated that he was between the ages of 20 to 30. He was white with brown eyes, brown hair, and he was between 5'4" and 5'8". He had prominent eyebrows, with deterioration of his upper vertebrae in his neck, possibly from a previous injury or joint issues. His wisdom teeth had either been removed or not yet grown, and that's why they're saying he could have been as young as 15-year-old. The male had been bound, gagged and beaten to death, while the female was strangled. Possibly unrelated, there was another body discovered in this area 18 months later. It was the body of Michelle Garvey. She was 15-year-old, and she'd been discovered a month after she disappeared. She'd been strangled and sexually abused. On the scene, there was no bra, there was no shoes, and as I said, she was discovered 18 months after in the same place. Once the bodies had been discovered, Mary Mize, a forensic artist, drew a pastel reconstruction of the couple, but no one ever came forward saying they recognised them. With very little clues and absolutely no idea who these people were, the case went very cold very quick. But then if we fast forward another 30 years to 2011, their bodies were exhumed in order to collect DNA from each body. That didn't seem to lead anywhere either, but then if we skip forward to January this year, 2022, 41 years after the bodies were found, things started to change. Mr. Gills and Alison Peacock of FHD Forensics were contacted by Identities International and handed the baffling case and the task of trying to identify these 2 people. The team put the DNA information onto fedmatch.com and they were able to find a match. The match they found was a cousin of the male. He was in Kentucky, and after contacting him, they did manage to establish who these 2 people were. The male was Harold Dean Clouse. He was 21 at the time, and the female was 17-year-old Tina Gail Clouse, formerly Linn. It turns out Harold and Tina were a newlywed couple. They left their homes in Florida in 1980 in order for Harold to pursue some carpentry work in Texas. They did keep in contact with the family quite regular, but in October 1980, that contact just dried up. It completely stopped. Then in late December 1980, or early January 1981, they had, which is roughly about the time of their murder by the way, Harold's mom got a phone call from somebody who identified themselves as Sister Susan. She was calling from Los Angeles, and she'd phoned to say that Harold and Tina had joined their religious group and they no longer wanted to have contact with their families. As a part of joining this religious group, they was giving up all possessions, and Sister Susan wanted to phone because she wanted to bring back their car back to their families, and the car was a red 1978 AMC Concorde. But then Sister Susan asked for some money in exchange for her bringing the car. So Dean's mother agreed that she'd pay $1,000 for Sister Susan to bring the car from LA all the way to Florida. So the family went to Daytona Racetrack in Florida and they met 3 women. The women were barefoot, wearing robes, so it appears that they were part of the same religious group. The family did get the car back, and then the 3 women were taken into police custody. But here's a major problem with this entire case. The police report from that day hasn't been found yet. It's not on file. Now, police said that this is quite common for reports that are that old, and they're still looking. I'm sure you'll agree as we get on to later into the case, that report could be super crucial to finding out what happened to Harold and Tina. However, up till now, I have missed out quite an important part of the information. When the bodies were identified this year in January 2022, the forensic scientist Alison Peacock contacted Harold's sister. Alison started by saying, "Do you have a family member that disappeared a long time ago?" Obviously, Harold's sister replied, "Yes, I have a brother. He disappeared 40 years ago. His name was Harold Dean Clouse Jr." Alison announced that Harold had been murdered and his body had been found in January 1981. Harold's sister then went on to ask lots of questions about how he was murdered and stuff like that, but Alison was quite reluctant to answer. So then Harold's sister turned around and said, "Well, what about the baby? Have you found the baby?" So Alison's now quite confused. She's like, "What baby? What are you on about?" So she explained that when Harold and Tina left and about the time that they cut off contact, they had a baby that was less than 1 year old. So then she repeated the question. "So where's the baby? Have you found the baby?" But the baby hadn't been found. Nobody was even looking for the baby, because in the 41 years since these bodies were discovered, up to now there'd been absolutely no sign, no evidence, no mention of a baby. So nobody even knew to look for a baby. So now investigators in Houston, Florida and Arizona started the search for baby Holly. But the first question was, how do we spell Holly? Because there's quite a few different ways to spell it. The most common is ending in IE or Y. And Alison Peacock's quite a stickler for detail, and she couldn't carry on without knowing that. For her, it was really important for her to find it. Other investigators were a bit blasé about it. It didn't matter that much. But for Alison, she really, really wanted to know if she were going to find the baby, she needed to know the correct spelling. So Alison and one of Holly's aunties requested the birth certificate from Florida's Department of Vital Records. But officials declined this request, saying they wasn't entitled to the record. This started a massive uphill struggle. They went up the hierarchy of people involved in the case, each one applying to get the birth certificate. Other detectives applied, the Attorney General's Cold Case Unit applied, senior prosecutors applied, judges, and finally getting 3 Attorney Generals from 3 different states, they managed to get Holly's birth certificate. The reason it was so hard to get hold of was because it was sealed. Now, in the US, a sealed birth certificate refers to a practice of sealing original birth certificates upon adoption, often making a copy of the record unavailable except by court order. And yes, that does mean along with the birth certificate came an adoption certificate. If Alison Peacock hadn't been so determined to find out the correct spelling of Holly's name, which other people remember thought were it were inconvenient but not that important, then Holly might not have been found up till this day, especially because nobody expected her to be legally adopted. So they wouldn't have even tried getting a birth certificate, they wouldn't have even tried checking that information. Maybe it's a coincidence, or maybe there's a mysterious power at play, but the day that the police walked into where Holly works to inform her that she'd been discovered and all the information they had, it would have been her dad's, Harold's, 63rd birthday. Harold's mom said this was a birthday present from heaven. Holly's alive and well. She's 42-year-old, she's a mom of 5, she lives in Oklahoma, and she's reconnected with her extended biological family. And obviously this is great for Holly and her biological family, but what actually happened? We still don't know who killed her parents, and we don't even know what happened to Holly. How did she get adopted? Being one at a time, she has no recollection of what happened. However, after finding Holly, the investigators did find out that Holly had been taken to a church in Arizona, and the family that adopted her did so after that. It was 2 women that had left Holly at the church. They were members of the nomadic religion, and they were wearing white robes, and they were barefoot. Authorities have been a bit secretive about what religion this was, but they have said that the religion believes in separating the males from the females, and they practice veganism, or vegetarianism with some veganism chucked in there. For example, they don't wear or use leather. The women also indicated that they'd given up a baby before at a laundromat. It's believed that this religious group travelled around the southern United States, including Arizona, California, and possibly Texas. There were sightings of the group around Yuma, Arizona in the early 1980s. The women members were seen around town in various places asking for food. Unfortunately, that's about as much information I've got on this case, and it's so bizarre, and it seems like it'd be super simple to solve. All we need to do is find out who these religious groups were, investigate, talk to them, find out who brought the car back, find out who dropped Holly off at the church, and surely that would put everything together. But from what I've read, it's not necessarily the same group that dropped off Holly and that brought the car back, although it does sound very likely. And it doesn't mean they had anything to do with their deaths, but let's face it, that is a very good lead, and that's where this all should start from. If the police hadn't lost that report, that might have damning information in there anyway. And if they're a travelling around group, I understand why it's so hard for them to find them. But it's such a shame, and it's so strange that this case went on for so long without been identified. Obviously, the reason nobody had cottoned on to the pastel reconstruction pictures was because they'd recently moved to the area, so not many people knew they were anyway. Another thing I'd been wondering is, in the early 1980s, how did the people in the robe, the people of a religious group, whatever, Sister Susan, manage to get Harold's mum's number? Sure, it could have been an address book in the car, I suppose, but I just find it really strange that Sister Susan has come out of nowhere and said, yeah, well, I want some money for this car. Oh, by the way, we've joined our religious group. We don't want to talk to you anymore. You know, it sounds like a cover story. And it sounds like they'd already been murdered or they're about to be murdered. And then you think, well, it was quite a risk to take the car back. If you've murdered someone, the last thing you want to do is turn up with their car and say, here, I'll sell it back to you. But remember, at this time, they had no information. All they could do is take Sister Susan's word that this is what we're happening. So it was good that they got the police involved, but at the same point, I do kind of see the police's point of view in this of, they've joined a group, we don't know what to do with you. What do you want us to do? Arrest them for murder? When, you know what I mean? There's just, back at that time, with just that much information, it's hard to see anything else. But was it a cover story, or did they actually join the religious group? Don't forget, the family last had contact with them in October. The bodies appeared in early January, and it said that they'd been dead for 2 months. That takes us up to beginning of November in my eyes. You know, so it's one of them where the time scale doesn't seem to fit. And while I've been looking this story up, or this case up, sorry, I've noticed that there's a lot of discrepancies. A lot of the places you find it, it says, oh, they were found between this date and this date. There is a lot of contradictory information. I mean, even to how long they'd been dead. One said between 1 month to 2 months, or it could have been 1 to 5 weeks. You can't say it could have been anywhere between 1 week and 2 months. I'm fairly sure even in the 80s, science were advanced enough for the post-mortem to say that, yeah, they've been dead within this period, not just at any time in the last 2 months. I think we can all agree the bottom line is the police need to hurry up and find this information, the file report of these 3 women, because that could have some really vital information in it. And something else that I can't get out of my mind is the information about the green shorts and the bloody towel. It does sound to me, wherever it propped up that information, it sounded like there were no other clothes about. It also sounded like the green shorts weren't on the body. So that makes me think that the body were naked. I also found that there were unknown information about Harold's clothes, so re-naked as well. And then when you look into that, Michelle Garver that were found near, she were naked, or at least she didn't have a bra and shoes on, and she'd been sexually assaulted. She was found very near, she'd been strangled, you know what I mean? A lot of the same information comes here. And Harold, he'd been tied up and gagged and then beaten to death. So was he, you know what I mean? It just sounds a bit weird, that, because she meaning Tina, she'd only been strangled. Why weren't she tied up? It just sounds like there was some very sinister sexual assault type thing going on. You know what I mean? It doesn't sound like someone's just been murdered. I would like to say that, oh, they'd been murdered the same way, but that's not always the case. I mean, if you look at my first video relating back to like the 1800s in Castleton, she were stabbed, he were beaten. So you can't say that, but the fact that one were tied up and one weren't just suggests to me that there's something strange about that. There you go, guys. I'm afraid that's all the information I've got, and that's the end of the show. I know it weren't very long, and I am very sorry. It was a requested story, and I've done my best to get as much information as possible. Next week, I'll pick a story of my own and try and make a nice 40-minute long episode. I hope you got something from this episode. I hope you found it educational, informational. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do subscribe. Please do put a thumbs up. If you want to contribute any information, if there's anything that you think I've got wrong, or you just want to put your thoughts in, do so down in the comments below. Share it, subscribe, and much love till next week, guys. If you have got any requests, feel free to put them in the comments or message me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, anywhere, because I am everywhere. See you in a couple of days' time for the next Stranger Than Fiction video, guys. Bye.